I will now request Manish, uh, because I do not know how many people have been able to read it. So this has been, according to my mind, this pretty invigorating report, which we'll put up on the website also, and it has been circulated to most of the speakers as they have gone by, as you get to know. But I request Manish to give the perspective so that subsequent speakers can give a little highlight.
Thank you so much, Shantanu, and I'm going to time myself as well. So over the next few minutes, I thought probably we'll spend some time on what we believe are the likely trends in the digital disruption. I actually like to see more as digital enablement opportunity rather than just a pure disruption. Disruption has got slightly negative connotation. So if one was to structure the trends from broadly three perspectives, one is I want to talk about the trends from the supplier of finance side of it, which is basically representing the broader banking and financial services industry. The second view is from a customer's perspective, and the third view is the broader stakeholders around regulations and other ecosystem players. So if you look at it from the supplier of finance perspective, what we are going to witness is a huge amount of intense competition. So we already have seen close to about 20 new banks springing up over the last 2 years. So 2 universal banks, and one doesn't really know how many payments bank eventually will be there, but about 10 small finance bank as well. And this has been sort of unprecedented growth in terms of number of players that we've seen in the Indian banking industry for quite some time. The supply of finance is going to create its own demand, and that's actually the logic which the Reserve Bank of India also followed in giving out so many licenses. So thus the whole game is going to be that how does one create access, how does one create a customer value proposition, how does one create a differentiated digital offering which is now going to resonate more with the customer of the future. The second bit is that growth is not going to be an issue per se. Because there are newer customer segments which are coming about. There will be a finer view on what should be the target customer. There will be better differentiation and better understanding by the industry players on who the customer and what their needs are. As it is, the underpenetration of financial services is very large in India. So it's all going to be about that. What is the value proposition that the bank and industry players is going to sort of position themselves as, and what are the customer segments that they're going to go after. So organic growth is not going to be a challenge. There's going to be a huge opportunity which will come on the inorganic growth side, and the reason for that is that we will have players who will fight for capital. And capital obviously is a function of your business model and your profitability, but players which have got access to capital are actually the players which are going to differentiate themselves purely on the ability to invest in creating a digital platform which will then help them garner a far higher market share. There's already a conversation of consolidation in the industry, so which means that competition is going to get more acute in the coming years. The other side of competition is this, that we believe that from a pure financial services play, we will find players and the industry aggregating to a broader ecosystem play, which means that, and probably it's best actually demonstrated by an example, that most of the payments bank, for example, have got a commercial bank or an NBFC tie-up. And the reason for that is that the focus is going to be on the share of wallet, and there is a requirement to meet most of the customer needs on a single platform. That platform would eventually consist of multiple players. So you'll have a payments bank which is participating, you'll have a commercial bank which is participating, you already have a telco which is part of the ecosystem. We have cases where BPCL has participated with a payments bank. HPCL is also tied up now with Airtel Payments Bank. So there's a petroleum company. Eventually we'll see retailers also becoming part of this ecosystem, probably. So anyone who's got a large customer base or a large physical network, it makes sense to become part of a broader financial services ecosystem, because then you are getting a higher share of the customer wallet. The balance of power in this ecosystem will actually be with the person or with the player who actually owns the customer. So eventually, if the customer is going to access a white label bank through Flipkart, for example, the lion's share of the profits which will come from the customer transaction will obviously lie with Flipkart. So there's going to be a race that who's going to own the customer, what is the landing page, and how the entire ecosystem sort of plays out. From a second perspective, which is on the stakeholder side, and I believe that in India, for the foreseeable future, customer interest will be paramount on any regulator's mind. And we've seen that, and that's not just from cost of transaction perspective or access perspective, but given the fact where we are on our financial literacy, people outside this room, we know that what is the level of true financial literacy. And in fact, people like us who are mobile literate, who we think are digital literate, still have not fully comprehended the possible use of digital financial services. So customer protection is going to be paramount, and which will be tailwinds which all the players will sort of face. At the same time, I think that the players who are investing in creating secure networks, so how secure the services are also going to be differentiated, at least in the short to medium run. So, as an industry, of course, security concern is an industry issue, but within that, players who are able to offer far more robust platforms and far more integrated customer value proposition in a secure environment are likely to, gain more market share than some of the others. Which brings us to the last part of the triangle, which is the customer itself. And I think that the biggest disruption is going to come from the customer side itself, and from two aspects. One is that the growth which India has experienced, I think that we have already reached the next cycle, in the sense that India is getting wealthier, which means that our disposable incomes are rising far higher than what any of us have seen in our lifetimes. That cycle is going to continue. And when the individual income levels are going to rise, the propensity for demanding financial services is going to rise at a much higher rate. So typically the ratio is 2.5 times the GDP growth. So that itself, there's an indication that whatever investments have gone by the players right now in building that ecosystem is probably going to be inadequate, and the demand might actually outstrip. So that's the reason why we will see a lot of market share being gained by fintech players and traditionally non-financial services players, and that is what is likely to continue as well in the short term. The last bit is around the entire. There's one view around how do you monetize the data, but how do you convert the data into information into insights, and insights actually into actionable insights, because insights on its own are insights, but if we are able to monetize it either using location services or creating an economic identity of your customer, now that is what is going to be a game changer. And I think that FYC is going to be the new KYC, which is follow your customers, right? So you need to follow your customers, listen to them on the social media. A lot of it is spoken about data security and so on and so forth, and we will see the twin forces, one which is sort of keeping the customer privacy at the heart of it, but all of us know that a lot of data is already available on public domain, and we have today engines which can read your SMSs, which can know what is your website history, and there is a possibility of using your mobile data, for example, to create an economic persona. So we are going to be in a very interesting space, and I think that the players are going to build a strong digital DNA, which is not just a digital platform, but how is the value offering revolving around the digital DNA. Those are the players which are likely to be successful. I think it'll be very great to actually listen from the industry players on what their views are on the subject. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Manish. Very quickly, given most of the points. Now I'll ask Sridhar Iyer, Head of Digital Banking, Citibank. I listened to Citibank's global CEO in the fintechs. So I think Sridhar was also there. So I wanted to bring a little bit of perspective. Being a global bank, what's happening and what's in India, what is the uptake? I mean, I leave it to him to give a little more perspective on that.
Thank you, organizers, and good afternoon, everyone. I realize that this is the session just before lunch, so I won't keep you too long and make sure that you go hungry for a long time. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for giving this opportunity to share what we do at Citibank. I think we are at a stage which is pretty peculiar in the sense that most innovations normally come from R&D effort, but this is one of the few times in the industry where the customers are leading us to innovate. The customers, in many ways, are far ahead in terms of usage of mobile, in terms of usage of social media, and the banks, for once, are catching up. So I'll be very candid to admit that the pace at which customers are adopting new technology, the banks and financial services organizations are still playing catch up to it. So it is in that context that I'd like to talk for the next few minutes. So what is it that is shaping customer expectations, and why is it that banks are behind in terms of matching up to what customers are looking forward to from banks? If you look at customers' expectations from banks, they are being shaped by their experiences in the outside world. Customers are not anymore coming to us and saying that, look, XYZ bank is doing this, why don't you do this? Customers are saying, Uber is doing this. Ola is doing something else. Amazon is doing this. Can you as banks do the same thing for us? So their expectations from the banking and financial services is more because of their experiences outside the financial services organizations. I remember when I was in an MBA class, my teacher used to say that you must listen to customers and you must get their feedback and so on. I think we have reached the next plateau now. Customers just don't want to be heard. They actually want to participate in what we do. Right? So which is why I think in the previous sessions we had the speaker mention about co-creation. That's very much a reality. Customers today want to actually participate and shape and design the way financial services are offered. And more banks are doing that. The hackathons are one way of doing it. The focus groups that bank do is another way of doing it. Actually inviting customers and designing products is a third way to do it. Trainees and interns are yet another way of doing that as well. So the ability for banks to allow customers to actually participate and co-create offerings is something that will hold sway. The third thing that customers want is personalization of services. And when I say personalization, it is not that, okay, this category of customers deserve this offer. It is segment of one. Customers require personalizations to segment of one. I would need this at the time, at the place of my choosing. That is the standard that they are expecting banks to meet. So, and that is pretty stiff in terms of getting to that level. So personalizations to a segment of one is the next trend that we see. And finally, customers don't have just one source of information. Long gone are the days when you had a suited booted banker, and if he went and told customers that this is the way it is, they would believe him. Now it is not that case. Customers have a plethora of sources. They have social media, they have friends, they have crowdsourcing, they have banks, they have web terminals, a variety of ways. It's not that difficult to become educated on a banking and financial services if you were to Google for, say, a half a day. So you'd be well up the curve in terms of what is it that you need from the banks. So therefore, banks have to be really careful and be expert in the true sense, not just give overall macro level stuff for customers to swallow. So those days when whatever bank said went, I don't think that'll last anymore. So customers are very knowledgeable. They have a variety of sources of data, and they can triangulate and cross-check and make sure that the offerings that they're getting are genuine. And finally, Mr. Mahapatra mentioned in his talk about how access is more important than assets. I think that's absolutely true. Access is more important than assets, but I would also go further and say that not just access, but the access that customers want, right? For example, forcing customers to come on to the bank's portal all the time is not the best way to do it. Customers today are more likely to be on a WhatsApp. They're more likely to be on a Facebook. They're more likely to be on a shopping site. Is there a way that banking services can integrate in a very seamless and unobtrusive manner for customers to enjoy that? Banking, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, let me do retail banking tomorrow, right? It's not a jump out of bed sort of activity. Customers want banking to be secure. Customers want banking to be simple. They don't want to be scared of security, etc. But at the same time, they want banking to happen. It's not like going to a movie, right? Oh, I'm so excited to go to a movie. I'm so excited to do banking. They don't do such things. So it's important as bankers for us to take that in mind and make sure that the offerings are seamless, safe, and secure for customers. So on the one side, these are the expectations of customers. And what do we have as bankers to allow us to make sure that we meet these expectations? What has become available very recently has been the amount of data. Now, all of you must be very familiar with machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, and all those big jargon that people throw around. Now, why is that so important? Let me give you some statistic. Each of us, when we browse through the net, we generate almost 1.7 MB of data every day. Right? That is the sort of data that is available if we were to churn it and do it. Now, about 3, 4, 5 years ago, this sort of data was not available. If you look at most bank data structures, they were essentially row column data. So name, address, phone number, those things the banks are very good at making sure that they could manipulate their data, get insights out of it, maybe make offers and so on. But what has happened in the past 3-4 years is that we have this huge amount of unstructured data. And when we say unstructured data, this is data relating to your web navigation behavior. This is data relating to your biometrics. This is data relating to pictures. This is data relating to the emails. Now, all this is available in the net, on the net. So the ability first to get that data in one place. Second, make sense of that data. And third, like we heard before, find use cases of data, get insights that are actionable from data. That is what big data is all about. The ability to do all that, make sure that I know that the customer spoke on the phone, I also know that he went on the website, I also know that he came and visited the branch, all at the same time is the challenge that bankers are grappling with. And this is where most of the investment is going today. The ability to get a 360-degree view of the customer across the various touch points, and therefore make meaning out of it and offer services. So this is the ammunition that the bankers have. So what is the constraint? The constraint is security. Security and confidentiality of data, right? And again, like Mr. Mahapatra mentioned, security needs to be weighted down, right? When we look at security, the underlying assumption should be, what is the risk? In fact, I'll give you an example. I think about 2 years ago, there was a guideline to implement private key, public key infrastructure for retail bank login. And the banks have implemented that, right? If you look at the number of customers who are using it, you can count them in the hands of one finger, on the fingers of one hand. I mean, it is like a massive, massive axe to kill a fly. Nobody uses private key, public key to log into a bank account. So what is the underlying risk that this security measure is trying to address? That is very important when we design security systems. And which is why the involvement of the businesses, the involvement of the risk team itself, involvement of customers themselves will be key to that. And the risk is in many forms. Risk is in systemic risk is in infrastructure breaking down, but the risk is also in terms of confidentiality of data, the data being compromised. And this is where more and more of this focus is. Like biometric has made things very simple in terms of authentication. Biometric has also made things complicated in the sense that if biometric data is compromised, and we've heard some instances of that happening, this is, there is no recourse because there is only one set of biometric data. Unlike in a credit card where you can scrap that card and issue a new card, if biometric data is compromised, it's gone forever. So therefore, the stress on making sure that this sort of data is absolutely secure is really paramount. Now, I can go on for a long time, but I just thought I'll give you some trends of what the customers are expecting and where the banks are headed in terms of addressing those expectations. Thank you for listening patiently.
Next in line is one of the most up-and-coming and consistently one of the digital bank from early days, Mr. Amit Sethi, Axis Bank. I had a long time back when you were starting unfurling this ATM network, and I was instrumental in giving them a lot of branch network, I mean, where people were, even the conventional bankers, the state banks are also not going it. So I think they have learned the lesson. Now, important aspect will be to, if you can mention, the ATM is dying. What is it? Then how do you go it forward further?
Good afternoon. I'll try to keep it short. You've already heard a lot from my fellow bankers. See, one thing which is dramatically changing in the world today is the pace of change. Let's talk about three things: technology, environment, and risks. Technology, there used to be a curve which we used to call as a bell curve. A new technology would come, would get adopted over a period of time, would hit a number of users or number of people or enterprises, and then it will die a slow death as another wave of technology comes in. That bell curve today has got replaced with something called as a shark fin. Have you guys seen a shark fin? It just goes up suddenly, comes down suddenly. Technology is evolving at a very, very fast pace. What was true yesterday is not true today. For big, large organizations, 60,000 people organizations which are built over many, many decades, how do you make yourself agile to adopt to that technology? That is the challenge which most of us face. I'll give you a few examples. There are hundreds of examples of what's happening. Let me start with a question to the audience. How many of you have visited a bank branch in last 1 month? Okay. Yeah, I haven't visited a bank branch. I'm a banker, right? I haven't visited a bank branch in last 10 years. How many of you would like to see your banking happening in a Google kind of a way? If you know what's a Google screen, it's just a single bar, right? You type in anything, you get whatever you want. How many of you would like to do that? That's exactly what's happening. You see a digital front end for the banks today. Very soon, most of us, and some of us have already started launching it, you'll see a Google bar. You will do banking as you do chatting. WhatsApp, what's my balance? Can you pay my bill? Can I know how to open a home loan account? Can you open a home loan account for me? The power of technology. There was many of you, I don't know, how many of you have worked in manufacturing sector? Anyone who's been in the manufacturing sector here? Okay, one person. I've been in the manufacturing sector. See, services sector like banking has always followed decades behind manufacturing sector, and there was a reason. The reason was technology. I used to work in 90s, early 90s in a steel plant. It was a no-touch plant. The steel used to get made automatically. We were just sitting there waiting for any failure to happen or any exception to happen, and then we would intervene. Just 20 people running a huge plant with million tons of capacity. Look at services, banking. Axis Bank, 60,000 people. State Bank, I don't know, 2 lakh, 1 lakh, 1 lakh 50,000 people. The reason was services needed a different set of technology, not a labor replacing technology, but an intelligence replacing technology. Have you heard of a technology which replaces human intelligence? Anyone? Artificial intelligence? Haven't seen? Steven Spielberg? A movie made a decade back. AI is one technology which is actually expanding the way we use data, the way we understand what is required to be done, and the way things happen. What if I were to tell you that today 50% of the loans which Axis Bank underwrites, if you know what's underwrites like risk, do a profiling, is done by machines, not by humans. That number we expect by March of this year to reach 85%. How is it going to impact, and I'm talking of right now consumer loans, I'll come to the SME and the SB loans as well. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think my NPS should be going up? My performance of the book should be bad? Actually, no. It's the other way around. Why? Humans have bad days. Humans lack consistency. The same guy who is able to underwrite well on the basis of the same set of data may take a different call when the same set of data is presented to him tomorrow. It's human nature. Machines don't do that. They do not have a bad day. Your only thing is you need to ensure that your algorithm keep on enhancing them. They make mistakes. You use tools like machine learning to correct that. It never makes the same mistake again. Many more examples. I'm going to just leave it at that. It's transforming at a very, very vast pace. The second thing that is happening is technology is becoming democratic and accessible. There was a time when, as a CIO or as an IT guy, I used to work with select few 10, 20 top large companies of the world manufacturing technology. Today we work with maybe 200, 300 of them. And are these large companies? No. These are young people, some of them from IITs, from IIM Ahmedabad, from Stanford, moving out, starting something on their own, using technology because it's extremely democratic and accessible to create innovative solutions. Today, 40% of my spend goes into these small companies, startups, fintechs, medium-sized companies, not to the large companies. If you had asked me 4 years back, I would have given a different answer. That is helping the pace of change. That's helping agility. That's helping us keep pace with the changing technology. Environment is also changing extremely rapidly. November 8th. Anyone remembers? What happened? Demonetization. No one had seen it coming, right? Nobody will forget. It was like what I call July 26. People who were in Bombay on 2005 July, it was like that kind of a day, especially for banking, because the most impacted was bank. No one was aware. We were not prepared. Every day RBI would send us a list of changes, maybe 20, 30 in a day, sometimes contradicting the same thing by the end of the day. And we were supposed to be ready by the next day before the branches open to do that. Environment is changing. The government is changing it rapidly. Aadhaar. How many of you do not have an Aadhaar card? Do you know that most of the banks today open paperless accounts? You should have tried opening a bank account 1.5 years back, 2 years back, when there was no Aadhaar. Yeah, all of us know what a pain it was. See, the environment is changing at a very, very fast pace. That is making banking also change at a very fast pace. We believe in next 1 year's time, maybe less, most of the consumer banking will become paperless. Home loans, we are hoping some states are already working on digitizing the property and all that. But wherever it's available, it will become paperless. And I think the government is moving at a very, very fast pace. Last thing, risk. What do you think is the biggest risk that most organizations run today? Natural calamity? Financial risks, credit risks, yes, obviously. I think most of the organization, they run the biggest risk is InfoSec. And that is changing at the most rapid pace. See, I've been talking about the pace of change. The InfoSec risk is changing at the most rapid pace today. What did we as bankers or as CIOs and CISOs used to do? Traditionally, we used to do something called as perimeter security. If you understand, it's like putting a fence, putting a door so that nothing can enter the house. We are secure. घर में कोई अंदर घुसा नहीं तो चोरी क्या करेगा? Logic, right? That's no longer true. There are ways and means, there are locks available to unlock your Godrej lock that you put. There are places, nooks and corners available in your house which you are not aware, and people are trying to get in through that, and you're discovering new ways of these things every day. That is becoming the biggest challenge. How do you manage it? I think besides what we used to call as stop or put a perimeter security, the most important part of IT security is becoming rapid detection and stopping it. So prevention is obviously something that you try to do, but believe you me, there would be holes and nooks and corners that people will find. Most of the organizations, including banks, are building capabilities where we are trying to detect any such breach quickly and be able to plug it extremely quickly. And that is the biggest paradigm. And which technology is going to help here? I mentioned it. It's again going back to analytics and AI. Even information security is more and more becoming about studying a large set of data, the way data flows, the way we are seeing logs getting generated, the way people are behaving, and be able to predict that something is going wrong at a very fast pace and be able to do it. It could be as something as simple as figuring out if, in spite of you using your password and OTP, whether it's still you as the same person. There are various things we can do. I'm not going to talk about the details, but there are various things we do which we call as adaptive authentication. We figure out who you are, what you are, and whether what you are doing is same. In spite of you having all the right credentials, whether it's you who's trying to do this transaction, It's happening on every transaction that you do for payments, every time you log in. We do that on our servers. We do that on our staff. Is this guy the one who's supposed to come in there? There are various analytic tools getting used. That's how the information security is also changing at a very, very rapid pace. I've just touched upon very few things because of the paucity of time. Happy to answer any questions whenever you guys have when you meet me outside. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I think you have a lot of questions and this thing. Yes, sure.
Okay. ATMs. ATMs and cash is a function of how quickly we as a nation decide to put a stop to it. Today, tools and technology is available to stop. You need not carry cash today. There are enough environmental systems, banking systems, which are available to make you totally cashless. It's just a question of when our nation decides that we want to stop cash. If we decide it within next 2 months, we can do it. You don't need to wait till 2020. It's just a matter of how quickly people can adopt, and we can, as a nation, push it and do that. If we can do demonetization in a day, we can definitely do a cashless society in next 6 months. So yeah, ATMs will die eventually.
That was expecting. I mean, unfortunately, Tomal has just joined us, and I had to do the. I mean, he could have spiced up a little bit more in the usual manner. But anyway, we will have the opportunity in the next session. Now, let's break away with the banks a little bit. Let's ask Prasenjit. He's a little bit of having a sore throat. But what is the perspective? One of the biggest tycoon of industries, Aditya Birla Financial Services. How they're going to fitting into this scheme and all that. And later on, I will come to Deepak and finally Pravidya.
No, it's all right. This is good. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Yes, you'll have to pardon me for my sore throat. Normally, I would have also, being a Bengali, I could have spoken for significantly longer times. But then today, I guess we'll just hurry on with it. I think, so I basically look after the NBFC. So I'm part of overall financial services. And I think the good advantage I've got now being placed between the banks is to just give you a little perspective of how we went about evaluating the opportunity as an NBFC. So first and foremost, I think it's critical to just put on the table that it is an ecosystem, and that's going to be the big change which we've seen and we're seeing. The ecosystem of banking and financial services needs to thrive for this entire space to develop the way we look at it. As an example, I don't know if Deepak is aware or not, but Aditya Birla Finance is working extremely closely with Kotak to actually launch something on the digital side where we believe that both Kotak Bank and Aditya Birla Finance together will be able to put out an offering on the digital side, which is going to be, the first of its kind. To my mind, there are around 5-6 participants in the ecosystem, and then I'll talk about how the NBFC specifically, ranks. So obviously the government regulator, they're playing, a key part in developing this. The customer, I think all of you are aware, I think Amit spoke about it beautifully, that, how would you all today, or how would all of us today look at banking and financial services? The investor community, the accelerators, if you club all of them, and the kind of pressure, honestly, which is being put on a lot of the fintechs, what is their perspective on, how they see this developing? Are we going to continue to see a lot of VCs looking at the asset-light fintechs being critical to the ecosystem, or are we going to see VCs and PEs, developing more of the enablers or tools, as we call them, which are required for this community to work, which brings me to the fourth participant, the fintechs themselves. So many of us in the fintech world are, getting glamoured, are englamoured by origination and customer acquisition. I think a lot of us, in the fintech space are going to be talking about how we can acquire more customers. I think we're sort of missing a trick there. The people, I read this recently, the people who made money, for example, in the gold rush, were not necessarily the people who went digging for gold, but it was the people who actually made the shovels and the pixels, which enabled the entire boom around the gold rush. I think that's very key, that, for example, a company like Perfios, everybody of us sitting on the stage, people who work in banking know the company Perfios because, they are the pretty much the front runners, if not the pioneers in the space of, scraping banking statements after Yodlee, which was the American company. But if you were to go about asking people that, okay, can you name another fintech, which in a space, the one thing bankers and NBFCs love talking about is the use of Perfios and Yodlee and how it's changing the face of the game. But if you were to ask the fintechs and look around and say, can you name another company in that space who's doing the same thing? Isn't there space for one more company? And you'd struggle to find a creditable name, which makes you want to believe that, somewhere the focus around customer acquisition and origination has sort of taken so much priority that people are not necessarily looking at, the other aspects. Amit also, I think, spoke about his time going, in 40% of his time going with, small fintechs. Interestingly, we've been spending some time with the larger IT companies, and they, to my mind, are a fifth participant of the ecosystem, which really needs to pick up the pace. CRM such as Dynamics and Salesforce, for example, the cloud provision from all of the large companies, those are as critical, if not, frankly, the base and foundation to which the entire digital community needs to base the work on. If, for example, we didn't have an AWS, I don't know where a lot of, or the Azures of the world, then where would a lot of the work which is going on, how would it actually reach the end customer and the players in between? So to my mind, we should not forget the role which the large IT manufacturers have to play, need to play, honestly, and they need to sort of step up the work, which a lot of them have. Salesforce is another example. The kind of work they've done in this space is amazing and absolutely critical to the space. And frankly, finally, the NBFCs. How we differentiate ourselves from a bank. And when Mr. Birla approached us around 2 years back, he said, where do you see, frankly, digital was not what we wanted to do. He came to us saying that how do you find a revenue opportunity, as you'd expect large promoter to, the shareholders to ask you that, where is the next revenue jump going to come from? And when we went about answering the question, and I think that's absolutely critical to the plans which you all make, is that, digital should come as an answer. We should not be talking about digital because, that's what everybody's talking about. I think, yeah, sure, that is a perspective that, if you're not on this train or on this bus, then you're missing out. But frankly, we all need to find an answer which digital is going to solve. Otherwise, it'll be just one of those things. And a lot of us today are, guilty of, there's this expression called putting lipstick on a pig. Slightly crass expression, but I think that's what a lot of us have done, which is, we've built this wonderful, white-labeled acquisition, lead capture kind of format in lending specifically. And then the minute you take it offline, the minute the customer applies, you actually take it offline and you create files and paper files and everything around it. The fact that banking liability account opening has moved to paperless is an example of how it should be done, right? That's an actual example of things. But, the fact that, if you will look at, again, touching upon something Amit said on underwriting, if you were to look at the large fintechs who've, are commanding absolutely amazing valuations today, 40, 50 times of their book, and we've lent to some of them, we work with them very closely. And if you were to examine the underwriting which goes on in their shop, whether it's digital or not, far from digital. It's actually extremely offline. It's pretty much the same way of doing things. It's just that the acquisition is online. So I think that is a key, piece that, when we think digital, we should actually be thinking about how we actually do something which is adding value to the customers' lives. And that's perhaps where, in Aditya Birla, where we started thinking of an opportunity. We said in the NBFC space, where do we push the envelope? How do we expand the revenue set? And we said, let's look at, for example, the consumer durable space, which is, where banks, for example, are regulatorily, they are challenged to participate because of certain norms. So we said, how do we enter that? Can we get into a checkout financing space? And Bajaj is a great example of, having dominated the market so successfully in that space. And then we noticed that Capital First and Home Credit also came along and have done fairly well because the opportunity is so large. But if you were to look at the kind of digitized processes which are possible in that space, I think there's still an opportunity. So honestly, from an NBFC's perspective, that's where we're looking at. We are saying that can we actually, for example, lending to SMBs or SMEs as they're called here online, can we underwrite without taking a single physical paper from the customer? And obviously that would mean ticket sizes going significantly low. And that's frankly, the big opportunity and advantage NBFCs like us have. The average ticket size in my business in Aditya Birla Finance was typically around 1.5 crores, 2 crores, say around 2 years back. We started almost at 7-8 crores, which is pretty much even, it used to be higher than what banks were at. Now, the average ticket size in the space which we are building is in the range of, and this is lending to an SME owner. So it's a business loan we are talking about. In the ticket size is in the range of 1.25 lakhs to 1.5 lakhs. So we've dramatically dropped the ticket sizes, obviously in line with the principle of underwriting completely based on online sources. Which brings you to another interesting point, which, I noticed. There is this, and bankers have this, and, I've been a banker before this for 12 years of my career, and I know that, we've gotten used to the way things have always been. And again, I think, Amit, I'm quoting you on everything today, but I think he mentioned very well the evolving nature of what's happened. Think back to, just around, and you can check Google, you can check with Google on this, and if you were to look at the category of SME business loans being originated online, and you'd see that number was absolutely minuscule, specifically compared to, if you were to look at consumer loans, personal loans, home loans, all of that, the bank bazaars of the world, the Paisa bazaars of the world, you'd see that business loans as a category was non-existent, pretty much non-existent. Over the last 6 months, if you see, and we've been working very closely with Google on this, and today approximately 60% of our loans are originated only from Google online, and we're doing a fair bit, running at fair clip now. The point is that things have significantly changed from where they were. The category is existent. Gone are the days when we believe that, an SME guy, especially somebody whose turnover is 15 lakhs or 20 lakhs turnover, is not going to come online to find a loan. That's not true. He's very much online because his children know about WhatsApp, his children know about Facebook. He himself is savvy enough. So there is this entire need to change, the things, not just from the perspective of technology, but from the mindsets we frankly bring to the table, which is my last concluding remark on the subject, is that we've been, when we were exploring how to go about building this business, there are two ways of actually setting out and building a digital shop, and I've been doing that now for two years plus. One was the Chinese way of doing it, which was the traditional, let's say, Indian banking way of doing things, which is build it all in-house. Make sure your technology guys, your risk guys, your operations, everything is in-house, and you sort of in-house the secret sauce, as they call it. When we were exposed to, the way Israel works or the way America works or some of the other places, we noticed the other way of doing things is through partnerships. You need to be comfortable with outsourcing a lot of the activities which we do. And, again, we spoke about risk being completely algorithm-based. I think that was one of the first things which we noticed, that you need to actually be able to outsource not just activities which we are completely used to outsourcing, but also activities which bankers sort of have staked claim for of long. The secret sauce, to my mind, is not going to be in a particular component of the value chain. It's going to be in our ability to string various solutions together. So let's, as a community, embrace the need for partnerships. Let's allow for innovation, not just in customer acquisition, but also in the service and collection side. And As I said, collections, any fintechs out there looking to, crack a problem for the banking NBFC kind, solve a problem on logistics, solve a problem on collections, and you'll have a great, a lot of us sitting on this panel would be interested in it. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Next in line, we have exactly 10 minutes and 2-3 minutes my closing remarks. So, Pravid and Deepak Sharma. Mr. Pravid Rai, he's a founder and he writes and discusses a lot about, so founder of Paymet. Then Deepak will be speaking last, so please.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Narendra, Shantanu, audience and the folks on the platform. So I think my position is somewhat like what's currently there in the BFSI sector, that you have all the establishment and the institution on one side, and there's one guy in the panel who's a fintech guy, and he's supposed to be the disruptive guy, which is changing things around. But having said that, let me just roll back from where Prasenjit left off, and he did say that we are all now more or less clear where the threats have come from, and in the near future from where they can come from. So yeah, new generation banks is one, and then your social media and companies, your WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, Google. Second batch who are reaching out and trying to nibble away at the traditional establishment ways of doing finance and banking and payments. And the third way, again, Prasenjit hinted at it, is there's a feeling that in the next 10, 15 years, traditional banks will disappear and tech companies will become banks. And why is that so? It's because tech companies are powering most banks in the world. Their back-end systems, they're either doing in-house or outsource or offsite or on cloud. So A, they run all the processes, they run all the technology, they probably even host some of the data. So there's a view that tomorrow's world, maybe an IBM will become a bank, maybe Microsoft could become a bank, or maybe someone we don't know at all could become a bank. And then there's another set of interlopers, disruptors, far beyond what we can see. Pokemon could become a bank. Not to mention Uber and Airbnb. Now, Pokemon's model is very clear. They're gaming, as we all know. They're moving to augmented reality. And the next generation of business models, monetization, is how they can do payments, how they can get credits, give credits, which you can exchange offline and online, and monetize that, whether it's their own merchandise, whether it's role-playing games, whether it's person-to-person Pokemon, the whole lot of set of characters that Pokemon has, they're now going to say, we are going from a gaming company, we want to become a payments company. So these are some quick thoughts to leave with you guys on the panel as also in the audience, that we don't know where the next threats are coming from. So we should be very wary, and one thing I've noticed is, at least on the panel here, everybody is sensitized. All Indian bankers are very sensitized to these things, which I don't find in the UK or in Europe or even in America. The way that Indian banks have adopted to new media, digital, and are aware of things which are happening and able to co-opt them on board is quite positive. Most banks have their own incubators and accelerators. Most banks are open to working with new startup guys. Most banks are quite happy working with new fintech companies. So this is a good sign. I have worked with almost all companies in the banking sector, many of them here directly and indirectly over the last few years. So it was a tough shot initially. We took 3 years to close with Citibank. But the sales cycle nowadays is days actually. So that's a huge jump that has happened. So that proves that they're on the ball. Actually, I'm a bit of an interloper on this session because I was in the previous session and I couldn't make it. So my subject was something very different. It was on trust model in the financial sector. And I think the previous speakers on the panel did talk about follow your customer, banks having your data, customers wanting access to data. So my model on trust was a fourfold model for the financial sector, which consists of 4 substantive principles. First one is tomorrow's customer and today's customer will want to own their own data. So I call it OYOD. Second is they'll be very worried about the protection of the data that they have given you. Third is it's for the banks and the financial systems to then ensure that they have enough agreements in place and security to ensure that the data doesn't go out from within their silos and the sharing of that data is regulated. And last but not least is security of data, and I think one of the panelists mentioned it earlier about the immutability of data. Like if biometric data is lost, there's no way to do reverse immutability. It's lost for all time. You can always reseed your email number, your mobile number, you can get your PAN card again, but biometric data which is lying on a server, once lost, is a big loss to individual and also to the state. So the principles of trust, as we all know, being in the banking sector, is in payments it's non-repudiation or orthogonal payments, that someone makes a claim on you, you're bound to honor that. In security for data is all about immutability. Once your data is lost or stolen or shared with or without your knowledge, forever you have lost that piece of information and there's a loss of privacy. So I don't want to dwell too much into the details of the trust model as applied to banking and financial sector, especially after the Supreme Court ruling. I think this will change the models, the processes, the technology, and our own consumers' understanding about the importance of data. I just want to leave with 4 examples, which I think I should try and make it as simple as possible for you to understand what this means. Owning your own data has got 4 precepts. One is opt out. So we all download our apps and then we all automatically, without even thinking, right, I accept, and you download the app. You don't exercise any conscious decision on that. So I call that opt out, because you don't want to download the app, you say, I disagree, I do not agree to your terms, and then you come out of the system. The second is what we all do for our credit cards and banking and all that. You sign off, and you're liable for the conditions and terms which you sign off on. So that's opt-in. Third is where I get a message, please link your mutual fund and your bank account to an Aadhaar number. That's neither opt-in nor opt-out. That's the diktat or the fiat of the state. Fourth is, I got a message this morning on the way to this seminar saying your State Bank of India bank account has now been linked with your Aadhaar number. I don't have a State Bank of India number and I don't have Aadhaar. So where did that message come from? So these are some things that we need to figure out and keep in mind. This is what owning your data principles are based on. So once we understand that, then the processes that we put in place will have to address these issues. So finally, just a few words on security. I think previous panelists have talked about it. Security is dependent on endpoints. Again, somebody spoke about it. Endpoints means from device to the server and from server to other third parties. You have to secure every element and every leg of that. I think there's a lot to say on that today. We always see data being shared every day in the newspaper. We are told that even today we hear that biometric data may be compromised. We don't know the truth or veracity of that, though I'm sanguine about that. It's difficult. But these are risks that we have to accept and understand and have processes in place. And once you can always change your demographic profile data by reseeding, but once you've lost all your biometric data, you can't reseed or reset any of that. So with these few words, I'd like to end. Thank you.
Very good. Now, last not but the least, standing between all of us and the lunch, spicing up. A lot of Kotak is doing a phenomenally good work. I mean, instead of me saying that, I want Deepak to highlight that what's happening actually, firing the imagination.
Thanks, Shantanu. Mindful of the fact that, yes, I'm the last speaker and also standing between you and lunch, I'm sure I'll have all the attention because if I get your attention, I promise I'll finish fast. Okay. But I think also the challenge is, I think we heard a lot of wonderful speakers, not just in this session, but also in the morning sessions. So idea is also not to repeat what you have already heard. I would focus on three things that was the topic and trying to connect all three, which was service, convenience, and security. How banks, and more so when I look at from our context, we create a great experience, an experience not just for digital natives, which we often define as millennials and Gen Z and all, but also about building a financial service for the next billion users of India who probably are not smartphone savvy, who do not use English as their primary language of banking, and see that how you bring in the data security adoption, all of these together. So I think the first thing first, when we refer about data, there are two types of data that comes to my mind. A data which is a network data, which is a 3G or a 4G, or basically the data network that we are talking about. Where again, from a data poor country, we are becoming a data rich. To the extent I was reading that India probably is the highest consumption of the data and bandwidth now in the world. And again, the consumer data, where again, thanks to multiple initiatives, right from be it a GST to Aadhaar to India Stack to moving online transactions, I think we are seeing there is an abundance of data unlike what we had in the past. So I think it creates opportunities for everyone alike, be it a fintech, be it a tech company, and all of us, including those who sell data warehouse and data mart to the analytics packages to all of us. The challenge today when we are thinking from experience and service is that increasingly we are working in a multi-channel, multi-device, highly fragmented consumer market. We all keep saying that consumer wants a choice, consumer wants a great experience. I think it's easy at times to ape what likes of Netflix or Amazon of the world do. But at the same time, mindful of the fact that this is a financial service business, and that also means that we are in this business because of the trust. And thereby, there is a much larger responsibility that be it a bank or any financial service has, is to protect consumer data, consumer interest, and make sure that the privacy and trust is maintained at the same time giving a great customer experience. Blending the two, be it when we look at any new channel. So for example, all this long we used to say ATM was a channel and how do we make it secure, be it for a card related fraud. We went on to IVR and we initiated something called a T-PIN, which was a way you validate yourself when you call a contact center and you want to complete a financial service. We launched internet banking or online banking and we had something like a net banking password. We launched mobile banking app and then now you have a MPIN. And now we are moving towards many more new channels where you do not control the ecosystem, but you are part of the ecosystem. For example, when we were the first bank globally to launch hashtag banking, which was a Twitter banking 3 years back, I had series of discussion with RBI to just explain to them that how the data flows, where since the Twitter servers were in US, how this information goes, do they have access to the information, what happens when there was a big Russian breach on Twitter, is it going to impact the customer data? Because there the ecosystem was not purely ours. We were leveraging on an ecosystem that Twitter had built. Similarly, when we started creating banking experience around Facebook, similar questions came. And now, of course, some of us are looking at even WhatsApp because WhatsApp is now opening up the enterprise API. So as increasingly, or some of us are even working on the likes of the Siris and Google and Alexa to say that how you can build a voice-based banking. So that means as we start looking at a distributed ecosystem, there is also a risk that we are all mindful of. Because now you do not control always the access. Also, I think what is increasingly changing is as banks are looking at becoming platform, and it's becoming more as a bank as a service where you are rendering the APIs or SDK to an external ecosystem, either to fintechs to power them and give them access to various services, right from payments to KYC to probably lending, or creating a distributed developer ecosystem. That means that you don't go and end up designing, developing, and deploying all the solutions within your own ecosystem. I think it also opens up a very different kind of risk. I think understanding of this risk, as some of the previous speakers have spoken, becomes increasingly important, because as we want to be agile, fast, quick to market, fail fast, and all those things that we often associate with, you also need to be mindful of that the weakest link in this entire ecosystem can go and destroy that entire confidence and trust. So I think increasingly this is an area which is getting a disproportionate focus. Also, as we look at increasing use of India's stack and payment stack, and beyond that, as we look at stuff like digital locker and the consent layer, there is an increased awareness about the privacy, security, and access to data, and how's the data getting used. I think with the new recent Supreme Court guidelines on the privacy, it's going to become even more important as to what kind of consent is used in any of the digital channels. Because today I know a lot of apps, they end up reading pretty much everything that you do on your mobile phone, right from the kind of mails, message, location, your contact list, and unless you give those permission, you're just not allowed to proceed. But again, there has been a change in regulation recently on something called a click wrap agreement. Now, where no more anything that you agree without signing it digitally while accessing any of the services online is going to be valid in the court of law. So I think there is an increasing change and awareness. A lot of it, obviously, consumers do not know. But as obviously financial services, we are at the forefront. And I think when we are blending innovation, we are looking at this as much. Another interesting thing I will just quickly share with you is as you would know, we launched probably one of the first of its kind, presence-less, paperless, real-time, signature-less banking through 811. That was focused more obviously towards the digital native. But at the same time, when we go back, and that's why I said thinking for the next billion users, we also go back and ask them that why aren't they even using a mobile phone for banking, even if they have a smartphone? I think the research brings in some very interesting insights. The primary fear is around security. We often associate security with the lack of digital literacy, but I think digital literacy and security, they go hand in hand. If we want to make most of our services, which are either government initiated or what banks and fintechs are increasingly going and driving on, this is one area which is going to be extremely critical. I think we have been working very closely with the various government agencies to see how the kind of devices that are sold in India have a higher level of security, because we also realize that close to 15 to 20% of the device today that's used in India, mobile phone, are jail-rooted. That means it's very easy for anyone to insert a malware, get to know your keys, what you are typing, even remotely access the SMSs or one-time passwords. Also, if you look at it, the kind of authentication today we do, most of the authentication today are still pretty much OTP based, which is going over a telco network in form of SMS, which is highly unsecured. Now, that again is going through a change where we are saying that there is a server level validation you end up doing. So there is nothing like a OTP that gets generated, which any human intervention is required. It's basically you do a SIM binding or a device fingerprinting through a server level authentication. So I think it will require a much larger and greater industry participation. While there are fintechs, I think we are increasingly looking at a lot of companies in IT and security space, just like what we heard earlier from SBI speaker. In fact, even I was very fortunate to spend a lot of time with various companies in Israel and around the world to see what kind of data security stuff that they've been building on. And I think that's more about how do you protect your own assets? That's the model that Israel has obviously worked very well on. Pretty much there is a saying today, and which I don't know whether it's true, but they say that every single enterprise in the world has been breached. Only difference is there are people who know and there are those who don't know. So I think if this is true anywhere, as I said, I don't know whether this statement is true, but this was a statement I heard, that creates obviously a much, much higher level of threat and security as we drive digital payment, adoption, banking, pretty much everything, and not just for those who are more aware, citizens or consumers, but trying to bring those consumers who today are on the fringe of adopting digital as a channel. And we want them to use digital for probably everything in their day-to-day life. So I think there was obviously, as I promised, I will keep it and try to keep it as short. Thank you very much. I'll be around for some time in case if there are any questions.
Thank you, Deepak. We are basically 5 minutes over time, and everybody is hungry. Especially our chairman is basically signaling me. So what I'll do, and a lot of questions I used to have and all that, there is a speaker's lounge in the left of that, so all the speakers should go there, and all of you might be having some questions. So let's have food and then interaction. We will be back here sharp at 3 o'clock. And I tell you all, we are already sparse because of so many factors. And next session is also equally important, where my dear friend, or to some extent mentoring that, I mean, probably this session could have been spiced up a little more if Tamal had been there. Tamal will be conducting that session. And we, at 4 o'clock, I mean, Mr. Hota will be joining this session. FFI, Senriza, ASOCHAM, everybody will be giving him a Lifetime Achievement Award. So I will request you, all of you, to stay back. And also similarly, I mean, Mr. Rawat is basically indisposed, he couldn't fly. We'll also announce that a Lifetime Achievement Award to Mr. Rawat also from ASOCHAM, which will be delivered to him in the next episode on OneLight. And we'll be announcing our next episode during the closing ceremony also. With all this, it's one of the, everybody listen to him patiently. You might be going back with a lot of questions, which you can take on during this luncheon session. Before we depart, the mementos, Narendra, I've asked you to give them quickly and have a group photograph. One more Deloitte and yeah. Three o'clock. 3 o'clock. Tamal, let's have some grub to have. And the speakers also, Tamal along with Shadri from Rajesh Seth is